Abibi Fahudie and blessings to the ancestors. This video is a condensed version of a presentation I put out previously on Brother Malcolm X and explaining his political and ideological transformation during his lifetime. Since his assassination, mainstream media and opportunists have used Malcolm's name to further their respective agendas or to dilute Malcolm's political advocacy for black nationalism and Pan-Africanism to make him more palatable for their respective interests. So since today is his birthday, we will commemorate his legacy and contributions to the race in hopes to clarify his intentions and recognize his contributions and his advocacy for black African people in the diaspora and the motherland. To add a disclaimer, I won't be discussing his specific events that led to his split with the Nation of Islam or the events surrounding his assassination, as those topics will be separate videos that I'll do in the future. To start off the video, let's start with Malcolm's upbringing and his parents. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little to Earl and Louise Little on May 19, 1925, as the fourth of 7 children. Malcolm's parents were active members of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, a Pan-Africanist organization that advocated for the collective self-sufficiency of black people globally, which Louise operated as a UNIA secretary and a Negro World writer, while Earl functioned as a Baptist minister who helped spread the message of black liberation through his sermons in the Midwestern region of the United States. This nationalist influence of his parents is testified by Malcolm in his autobiography, stating, "My father, the Reverend Earl Little, was a Baptist minister, a dedicated organizer for Marcus Garvey's UNIA. With the help of such disciples as my father, Garvey was raising the banner of black liberation and exhorting the Negro masses to return to their ancestral African homeland, a cause which made him the most controversial black man on earth." This influence will be reflected later once Malcolm departed from his criminal detour in his youth and cleans himself up as he transitions to adulthood. Malcolm is introduced to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam during his stint in prison. Founded in 1930 by Wallace Fard Muhammad, the nation's teachings are based on the Islamic and Christian theologies, mixed with elements of black nationalism that advocated for the spiritual reclamation of downtrodden black folks, such as Malcolm, to reform themselves and become self-productive individuals within society. The nation, led by Elijah Muhammad at that time period, advocated for common black nationalist themes such as the separation of races, specifically whites and blacks, in efforts to build self-sustaining economies and provide for the material needs for its people that was being ignored by the dominant white society as part of its overall spiritual reclamation of the so-called Negro. Once Malcolm converts to the NOI and is released by the early 1950s, Malcolm begins reforming himself under the nation's teachings, becoming more disciplined and removing his prior criminal behavior, and begins his organizing work. Malcolm's impact and contributions to the nation was seen by the start of the 1960s, where he organized the creation and recruitment of dozens of new members and NOI chapters, promoting the teachings and proposed development programs of the Nation of Islam. To cap off this section, let's detail some of the accomplishments of the nation and some of its negatives that resulted in future conflicts. The main accomplishment of the NOI included the creation of nation-owned businesses that employ sets of members, the creation of NOI schools, an example of which is Muhammad University of Islam, which is still in existence today, and in my opinion, the most important, the transformation of large sects of black people who were previously in dire conditions to become morally disciplined and productive citizens working towards the collective development of our people.
In 1955, when Elijah Muhammad visited the New York Temple, it was to inspect the work of the ambitious and outspoken young minister who had transformed tiny storefronts along the East Coast into a congregation of thousands.
Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad's message made a whole lot of people feel whole again, human being again. Some of them came out and found a new meaning to their manhood and their womanhood. Had Elijah Muhammad tried to introduce an orthodox form of Arab-oriented Islam, I doubt if he would have attracted 500 people. But he introduced a form of Islam that could communicate with the people he had to deal with.
However, the negatives in the nation will soon become apparent by the 1960s, which would produce conflict and lead to Malcolm's exit, which I will briefly summarize here and will cover it more in depth in a future video. The centralization and cult of personality built around the nation's leader, Elijah Muhammad, creating corrupting dynamics that led to financial mismanagement. For example, NOI officials taking money from the coffers and wealth generated from members being spent by Elijah Muhammad and his family. An example of which, most important of these issues, was the ideological conflict on the role of the nation in the wider black struggle amongst non-Muslim blacks at the time period, or more specifically, the creation of an economic and political alternative to the likes of Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement efforts. Elijah and the nation's leadership adopted a more conservative approach, opting not to get involved or creating an alternative, while Malcolm took more of an activist approach to use the nation's resources to create that alternative. These issues, amongst others, will eventually lead to Malcolm's departure in the aftermath of his chickens coming home to roost comments relating to the JFK assassination. This topic will also be delved into in a future video. After leaving the nation, Malcolm X founded the Organization for Afro-American Unity as a secular group to pursue its black nationalist and Pan-Africanist aims by organizing the masses of black people, in addition to founding the Muslim Mosque Incorporated as a religious vehicle to continue practicing Islam under his conversion to traditional Sunni faith. The efforts of the OAAU included advocating for registering black people as independents to build an independent black voter base to engage electoral politics, supported the right to self-determination and self-defense, and most notably, the drive Malcolm pursued internationally to indict the United States for violations of human rights of African Americans. In 1964, Malcolm traveled throughout Africa to gain support for his petition from emerging African countries and leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah and others, where he was introduced to Pan-Africanism in the motherland. However, these efforts weren't able to attain legal traction internationally, as explained in William Sale's work documenting the OAAU, stating, "A superpower like the United States had considerable latitude in international forums to block actions against for violations of international law. As the major funder of the United Nations and host to that organization, the U.S. possessed considerable power to block any embarrassing issues from being raised in that body." In the aftermath of his assassination, Malcolm's influence would be continued to be felt with the rise of the Black Power movement and the Black Panther Party in the latter part of the 1960s and 1970s, and for decades to come. As I conclude this video, I want to close out by clearing up some common misconceptions which is often used to push other groups' alternative agendas. The first of which is Malcolm's identification as a socialist. There has been leftists and others who've made claims about Malcolm being a socialist or would have identified with socialism had he lived, particularly after his NOI departure. There is no evidence for this point outside of his criticisms of capitalism and the support he expressed for African socialists such as Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere, as shown in his November 1964 interview in Paris. Another one of these misconceptions is Malcolm's supposed disassociation with race consciousness of black nationalism or Pan-Africanism. These claims are often made by leftists and Sunni Arabs who often cite this encounter Malcolm had with an Algerian ambassador during his 1964 trip to Africa, who challenged Malcolm's identification with black nationalism, thus claiming to exclude Northern Africans who are majority Arabs, which is seen in the quote I will include here. Now, as a personal note, there's a question on my behalf of Malcolm's awareness of the historical and geopolitical issue regarding the Arab-African question, which may have reflected on his answer, but will address this topic in a future video. To answer this question definitively, Malcolm was posed a similar question in the last weeks of his life in a February 1965 interview with an Arab newspaper, only to be released a month after his death. The interviewer begins his question asking, "Is it true even after your breakaway from Elijah Muhammad, you still hold the black color as a main base and dogma for your drive under the banner of liberation in the United States? How could a man of your spirit, intellect, and worldwide outlook fail to see in Islam its main characteristics from its earliest days that confirms beyond doubt the ethnological oneness and equality of all races, thus striking at the very root of the monstrosity of racial discrimination?" Malcolm responds by stating, As a black American, I do feel that my first responsibility is to my 22 million fellow black Americans who suffer the same indignities because of their color as I do. I don't believe my own personal problem is ever solved until the problem is solved of all 22 million of us. Much to my dismay, the Muslim world, meaning Arabs, has seemed to ignore the problem of the black Americans, and most Muslims who come here from the Muslim world have concentrated more effort in trying to convert white Americans than black Americans. So in conclusion, I hope this video helps give clarity on Malcolm's political transformation and his efforts to help unite our people here in the diaspora. In addition, expect a more in-depth video on Malcolm's split with the Nation of Islam in the near future. As we conclude today's video, don't forget to subscribe to OPP's mailing list to support our development work. And also, if you're a fan of boom bap beats, feel free to support my music and production by streaming and adding your favorite tracks and beats to your favorite playlist. Until next time, Abibi Fahudie, and blessings to the ancestors.
The Organization of Afro-American Unity sees the only hope for the black man in America in a strong Africa, and the necessity of the Afro-American becoming inseparably linked with the overall program that's existing on the African continent. The two problems must be solved together, and the two forces must go forward together. And so the Organization of Afro-American Unity has a program to link the Afro-Americans with the Africans and the Africans with the Afro-Americans. When I say Afro-Americans, I mean those throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. This is our only hope. Our hope is in a strong Africa. And when Africa is strong, our position in America will be one of respect. But if Africa is weak, we will never be in a position of respect in America. They used to have a saying that one doesn't have a Chinaman's chance. But they don't say that anymore. They used that expression back when China was weak. But now since Mao Zedong has been successful in making China a strong country, the Chinese have more chance than anybody else. So this saying has become outdated. Well, just as it took a strong China to give a Chinese person respect wherever that Chinese person is found on this earth, when we get a strong Africa, the person of African origin or African ancestry will be respected any place on this earth, even in America. But he will not be respected in America until Africa is strong, just as the Chinaman wasn't respected abroad until China became strong.